I'm Emily Laidlaw, and I would like to talk to you today about set for variability. This is an area where I haven't seen a lot of research, and I'm really hoping that we can put our minds together and maybe get more research going on this and see how we each, as individual practitioners and teachers, have put this into place or have supported it in our classrooms and in our practice, and see if we can learn from each other as another way to help our students move forward. Please come and visit my website, emilylaidlawtutor.com, and you can see the other work I've been doing and look at my videos in a more orderly fashion than they show up on YouTube. But today I want to talk about set for variability. And I didn't know this term until, I don't know, 18 months ago or something. I had never heard the term before. This term refers to the ability to flexibly approach the pronunciation of unknown words. So as we have words that there's ambiguity as to how to pronounce it, we want our students to be flexible and try the different pronunciations. Um, I didn't know the term was set for variability, but now I know that that's a term. But we would come across students and they'd read a word and they'd say, okay, they used one of the possible uh, pronunciations of the graphemes that were on the page, and they'd say, okay, that's the word, and not be able to say, hey, maybe there's another way to say those same graphemes, to connect that word, those squiggles on the paper, to a word in their memory. Not knowing that there was a term for it, I came across students who needed to be explicitly taught to try the other sounds, and then they needed to practice the process of putting those sounds together with the possible variations in place to then match that set of graphemes to a word that's in their vocabulary. I don't have the opportunity to work with many students who are neurotypical readers and learn to read as the average student does. I tend to see the bottom, 10 to 15% certainly. And the what I have observed with these students may not hold for other students, but there's enough of them that uh, if what I'm doing can help others, or if what you're doing could help me, I think it'd be nice to share information. The research that I have seen on set for variability indicated that set for variability is influenced by general vocabulary and phonemic awareness. Now, that makes sense. The more words you know, the better chance you have of saying, oh, okay, I get it. That word is whatever it is. And the better you're able to interchange sounds, the better you're able to try the possible pronunciations for that set of graphemes. But we see so many students who, because of reading disabilities or because of not being taught to put sounds together to the squiggles on the paper to decode words, they come to us 2 and 3 years behind grade level, and we've got to get them reading as best they can, as quickly as they can, so that they're not further hampered by this widening gap of poor vocabulary and poor exposure to syntax and literature. What can we do to help them improve as quickly as possible? For my students, I noticed some years ago that if I explicitly taught that, of course, we know we have to teach that the graphemes might have represent various phonemes, but to teach them how to interchange the phonemes and how to blend them together to create a word and then practice it. And that's the important part, is I think some of our students need to be able to practice that process to near automaticity so that they can quickly do that when they come to a word that is less transparent in text. English is not a very transparent language. It's quite opaque in that we have 8 or 9 ways to spell a certain sound, and we have certain graphemes that can have 4, 5, 6 different pronunciations, and they have to be able to try the different pronunciations to connect it to a word in memory. It makes sense to me that set for variability is influenced by vocabulary and phonemic awareness, but what do we do? And yes, we want to improve phonemic awareness, we know that. And yes, we want to improve vocabulary, but is there a way that we can help our students move along faster? And so this is what I've done, and I would love to see what other people have done, and maybe we can all learn together to help all of our students. One of the things we have to ask with teaching for set for variability is, does it need to be taught explicitly? Will it not develop automatically in children as they're reading text? If our goal is to provide reading instruction so that our students are able to interpret and get comprehension out of text, we want to give them as much text as possible. Anytime we spend explicitly teaching a detail or a skill is time that we're not spending in text. And I think that's a valid question. And I would say that from my observations, I think that many students don't need a lot of explicit instruction in set for variability. You just tell them that they have to interchange sounds. Is it read or is it read? Is it live or is it live? Based on the context of your sentence. And they get it and they move on. But for our students who struggle, the explicit instruction, from what I see, seems to help. Our students who come to us struggling, they've already got this mindset that reading is something you get through quickly. It doesn't have to make sense. Just get through the process, get through the time, and whew, okay, you're done. And they disassociate reading with comprehension because they're just trying to get through that time so that the teacher doesn't call them on them again, and um, they can move on. We want to give our students the mindset that reading has to make sense, that reading text is about getting meaning from the squiggles on the paper. And anything that we do that helps them make it through that passage and get comprehension is good for them. And if what we're doing just prolongs the agony of, I just have to make it through this time, let me out of here, um, we're not being productive. So I tend to think of this as like if I were teaching someone, or when I tried to learn how to play tennis, for instance, the the goal was to play the game of tennis, and the game had many, many, many components. There was a lot to think about in playing tennis, and each part along the way can be practiced. And in order to get better at each part, you could do things like hit the gym and build the muscles, or do intense drills on that portion to help you get that portion down automatically so that you didn't have to spend a lot of cognitive power on it while you're in the goal of playing a game. If you were going to serve the ball, you might have to practice that toss 800 times until it happened automatically, so that when you're playing the game, you're not thinking about, okay, how do I hold it? What am I doing? How hard do I toss it? Where do I stand? What's my motions? It happened automatically during the game. And same thing with reading. The process of putting sounds together in words should happen without thinking about it. We want our students to be able to blend the sounds automatically. We don't want to have to spend a lot of cognition on what is that, what sound does that letter represent, that grapheme represent, what sound does this grapheme represent, how do I stick it together, and let me say all of it together in a connected fashion. We want that to happen smoothly and without a lot of cognition. And when there are possible variances in the pronunciation of a particular grapheme, we want our students to be able to quickly interchange those sounds so that they can get the blended word as quickly and effortlessly as possible, then they can listen to, did that make sense in that text? Because we know so many of our struggling students will just mutter something under their breath and hope that you didn't hear that they mispronounced the word and they're just moving on. So we want our students to really connect the squiggles on the paper to something that has meaning, to listen to themselves as they're reading, to make meaning out of the text. There are three areas where I find explicit instruction and purposeful practice very helpful for the struggling students. The first area is where one grapheme is used to represent multiple phonemes. The second area is when we have a multisyllabic word where we have a consonant, vowel, consonant, and we ask the students to split between the two syllables or 3 or 4 syllables, however many there are. And the question is, do we have an open first syllable with a possible long vowel sound or a closed first syllable with a short vowel sound? And the third area where I find explicit instruction helps is when we have multisyllabic words and we have to practice where to put the schwa sound and the stress, which syllable to stress, and therefore which other syllables might get a schwa sound. In single syllable words or in single syllables of a multisyllabic word, we have many instances where vowel teams especially uh, have multiple pronunciations. This is my blending app that I've shown in the videos on continuous blending, where I randomize the graphemes and we practice blending the words. And it happened right now that I came up with a real word, but the OO is one that most of our students have trouble with. And the two main pronunciations, oo and are very difficult. And I know there are a lot of people who just say, just teach the word list and let them map those word lists. But I find that with my dyslexic students, the process of interchanging sounds is very helpful. In this Google spreadsheet, I have possible graphemes that I want to randomize here, and I ask it to randomize. And right now I'm looking at two of them, the OO and the OU. So as I introduce a vowel team that has multiple pronunciations, I will put it in here and have my student practice interchanging the two sounds. I would say we would practice the sounds are oo, so is it foot or foot? And now this one happens to be a real word, and we would say, oh yeah, our word is foot. But if we didn't have a real word, is it zool and zul? And just practicing putting the possible sounds in. Now, this point, I'm not connecting it to meaning because we're just practicing the process of putting sounds together with possible pronunciations. Um, And I don't like to spend a lot of time in nonsense words, but for our students who come to us with the habit of guessing, looking at the first letter and guessing, working with nonsense words just to cement the process of putting the sounds together, interchanging the possible sounds, I find is helpful and it helps them to break the habit of guessing. So because no one's read this word before and they might not have ever seen it before, you can't guess it. So zul, zul. And we would go through and try some of these. And I would want to hear whose, whose. For my students who have a difficult time, this is where extra practice and phonemic awareness helps. So I might start out and say, okay, say shoot. Okay, change the sh to a h and say hoot. Great. Now change the t to a z and whose. So just isolating the sounds and getting the sounds in there, all of that working together I find that it helps with the phonemic awareness, and the phonemic awareness helps with the set for variability, that they're able to, well, it helps with the process of putting sounds together. quickly. I want my students to put the sounds together quickly. So when they come to a word that they don't recognize, uh, they can quickly put the sounds, the possible sounds in place, and then say, "Oh yeah, okay, the word is," and we move on and we notice the structure of the word. But by being able to know the sounds and quickly interchange the sounds in a word, I get the student to identify the possible the word in their memory. So zoop and zup. And uh, being random, the OU has not come up yet. There we go. So here we have 4 possible sounds. Ow, oh, ooh, So if my student were working on this one, I would want them to say joug, jog, jug, jug, and move on. And we work on this just a little bit as they're learning each new vowel team that has multiple pronunciations, and then we see it in words. And I know there's a lot of people who suggest you just work on one sound for as long as it takes for the student to just be solid in that sound, and then you move on to another sound. Um, and I know a lot of my OG friends are very adamant about that, and I followed that for quite a while, but um, when it came to actually reading texts, that only worked for the words that the student had already mapped. And if the student had not mapped that particular word, they were still like, okay, which one is it? I don't know, just tell me. And it's like, I needed to get my students to be able to be flexible and say, here are the sounds. Let me quickly try out those sounds and connect it to a word that they would know. So, jog, jog, jug, jug. And here we go, deuce and dus. So I would do this with um, this randomizer for single syllables in using what would often be nonsense words, but often there would be real words that would come up too, but just to interchange. And then for the students that um, are uh, don't have the habit of guessing, I don't have to use a lot of nonsense words because there's enough words generally that we can work with real words. But it's really helpful for the students who are the guessers and just really need to focus in on here's the process. I'm working on the process of interchanging sounds. When I can use real words, I do sorts at that point. And this one happens to be in Flippity, but I've done it in Jamboard and in, just actual cards, index cards on the table when we could do that, and various other ways to do sorts. Uh, but I would give my students the list of words, give them a couple of targets, and they would pick up a word and say droop, droop. Which one is it? And then be able to identify it. Brook, brook, and shoot, shoot, and spool, spool. Okay, and we would go through and sort the words, still going through the process of identifying the possible sounds and putting them in place with with those specific graphemes. I use this process for mostly the vowel phonemes that have um, multiple pronunciations. I have to do it a little bit with like the G, and we know, okay, the G is always going to say G, and if it's not followed by E, I, or Y, but when it is followed by E, I, or Y, we want to try, is it gem or gem, or is it um, get or jet, and try the possibilities for those words. But basically, it's for the vowels, and it's the OO, the OU, the EA, um, particularly in the OW a few times, where we really need to practice that to give the students the ability to do that quickly as they're reading words and text. This is a quick clip of a student who was learning the INE ending, and I think you can hear how she interchanges the sound.
Pork Porcupine. 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 Porcupine.
That's exactly right. Okay. I think you could hear in there how she actually started out with a different split in her syllables, and then she tried the more common split of uh, splitting in front of the single consonant, which is what I'll show you right here. And she was able to recognize the word porcupine. And um, this young lady, she read all of those words and she got them, and she doesn't know what they all meant, but what they all mean. But she was able to decode those words. And I just want to say that that young lady, 12 months prior, her IEP said that she should learn to read CCVC words. That was her goal for that semester, is to read 4 sound words with an initial consonant cluster. So with going through uh, learning her sounds and putting sounds together and improving phonemic awareness, and then doing this type of process where she had to learn to identify the sounds and interchange sounds to get to words, she's now reading words like that. This part here is for when we have a VCV pattern. This is the most common one that I found is really helpful for students. And again, this is with a nonsense words. But for my students who tend to guess, which all of them come to me guessing and or just giving up, this helps them. If no one's read the word before, they don't feel so bad that they take a little longer than the other people to read it, and it breaks the guessing. So here I've got a VCV, and my student would want to identify, is it Z dump or Z dump? So they would try it 2 ways, with a open syllable Z dump or with a closed syllable Z dump. And we would do this a little bit, not too long with nonsense words, but just to get the process um, set in their brain. So tazopt or tazopt. And so as we go from a single syllable to multi-syllable words, and we do 2 closed syllables, and then we would go into closed and open, we have to be flexible here. So he'sn't and hasn't. And my students would practice this a little bit, get comfortable with it, and then we would go into real words. I tend to like Google Sheets. So I built these in Google Sheets. I also have them in Google Slides for my friends who are, don't want to use Google Sheets, aren't comfortable with using it. But I would dump my list of words in a spreadsheet, and we would do the same process and work on, is it omit or omit? Okay. And then this is punish or punish. And we would practice doing this until the process becomes fairly easy for them, automatic. And and then when they run into these words in text, they immediately go to, okay, is it punish or punish? Oh, punish, I know that word. And they move on, and it doesn't take as long. And I have found success in helping students practice the process to automaticity. And I also have the same setup in Google Slides and open up the words. So I would do this and say, is we're going to try both sounds of that vowel. All of these words that I'm showing you today have a single consonant between the vowels, so we have to try to both sounds, both the long sound if it were an open syllable and the short sound if it were a closed syllable. So I want you to say bay and ba, bay and ba, sick. Which one is it? Oh, it's basic. And is it hay or habit? Which one is it? Habit. And D or deduct? Which one is it? It's deduct. So I do have it in slides. I tend to just use the Google Sheets myself. just because I put my word lists in Google Sheets and then I use those same word lists all over the place because it's already a list of words. I can just copy it and paste it into whatever else I want to put it into. But I do have a lot of them set up in slides as well. The other area where I find it helpful to teach that flexibility is in stress and schwa. And I know a lot of people have a hard time teaching stress anyway, and many dyslexic students can't hear the stress. And it doesn't matter how many times you say, call the dog, call him to dinner. It's meaningless. They don't hear the stress. And I have found it easier to teach them to make the stress and then identify which way is it that you actually say the word than to say which syllable is stressed. Now, when we think about stress and schwas, the two reasons we would have to teach it are one for the spelling rule of if you have a multi-syllable word or two-syllable word, and if you have the second syllable is stressed and ends with one vowel and one consonant, and you're adding a vowel suffix, you have to double the last consonant. That spelling rule um, gives a lot of kids trouble. I know it gives adults trouble, and I find it not worth a lot of time teaching that. I tend to say if it's a two-syllable word and the first syllable is a prefix, and then you have the one vowel, one consonant, you're probably going to double the consonant to add on a vowel suffix. Um, and for most of my dyslexic students, it's easier to say, yeah, this is a prefix, and um, and so therefore I will double the consonant of the base part of the word. And that's easier to identify than saying, is it stressed or is it not stressed? The other time it's really important to deal with the stress and schwa in a word is in taking a word that you see printed and matching it to a word in your lexicon. When we get above about the 6th grade level in word identification, we often have to teach students to flex or try the various stress patterns within the word so that they can identify a word and match it to a word in their lexicon. I find it easier to do with a lot of the homographs because they can hear it and they can hear me say these words in sentences. A lot of them they know, and they know that they're pronounced differently. So I'll talk about punching it. Get your dukes up. We're going to punch it out. And so we would show by punching the various syllables, and we would say address. The address is on the envelope, and I will address it. Address. And when we talk about punching it, and the physical act of punching it seems to help my students associate that with what's happening in their body, that they're stressing that syllable. And as we do that, the address or the address, the non-stressed syllable can become the schwa sound. So it's address, address. I will address the envelope. Here we go. And I have a bar here so we can do that if we need to, but most of the time at this point I don't need to show the syllable break. But so the impact was quite large, and I hope to impact your education. We can practice these with the punch and the schwa. So here we go. In this one, the schwa becomes very important, and we would say the combine was on the farm and was very useful during harvest. The combine, but stressing the other one, combine. When the second syllable is punched, the first syllable often gets the schwa sound here. So it's combine. And teaching my students to make the stress is easier than teaching them to hear the stress. I don't know if other people have found that as well. And I have tried telling my students to call the dog, and that has not been successful, but getting them to produce the stress is easier. And then once we've produced the stress here in the homographs, we can also work with other words and produce the stress and then say, okay, where's the stress naturally? I would often start with when I go from two-syllable words to multi-syllable words, I'll say, this is what it looks like. And I said, let's just practice with a sentence first. And I can say, we're going to punch this one. Ready? I want vanilla ice cream. And they can hear that. And I want vanilla ice cream. And I want vanilla ice cream. Or I I want vanilla ice cream. Now I would do that in speech class when I coached high school forensics and show how we would use stress to emphasize a word. And that same process with my dyslexic students helps them to produce the stress. And then moving from a phrase to a word. So we would go distribution, 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 and identify where the stress is. Here, after we've done this a little bit, I don't take a lot of time, but I let my students tend to discover that in front of the shuns, it's the syllable in front of the shun. And after they've done that a couple times, they go to it automatically. And here in this word, we've already seen with our homographs that the con syllable, if it's not stressed, it tends to get a schwa sound, and we would work with that too. The reason it's important, this is a great word to show why it's important. If I were to just look and try to decode this word and say cons conspirator, that will not match to something in my memory, a conspirator. So I'm not getting any meaning from that text. So we have to be flexible and try the other possibilities. Here we go. We could try it this way. Let me move my schwas out of the way. And I can try it as conspirator. And we can try here. And at this point, I've also taught my students that words where there is a vowel or vowel, we often break the R controlled. Okay. So they know that if they try this one, we also have to try the other vowel sounds here. So we would try conspirator. And if they say conspirator, most of my students who've heard this word would say, oh, that's conspirator. If not, we would go through again and try this one. Conspirator. Oh, that didn't work either. So the next thing I have my students try is that if it's a vowel, consonant, vowel, uh, the vowel R, sorry, if it's a vowel R vowel, the R controlled is often broken. So we have to try the possible sounds for the vowel I here. And we would try schwas in the other one. Conspire, conspirator, and then trying the short vowel sound, conspirator. Oh, okay, conspirator, and we would get that. Now, this is obviously more advanced, but when we get our students who have struggled for so long and give them the ability to decode words um, at their grade level, there is such a boost to confidence, and it gives them so much more willingness to try and keep going, and the pride that they feel here, to give them the strategies and the tools to use to decode more accurately and to get to meaning, as we always want to get to meaning. That's a quick demonstration of what I do with my students to help promote set for variability. My objective is always to get the students to comprehension, and by giving them the tools to get to meaning as quickly as possible has been good for the students. This is how I've dealt with it, and I would love to see more research to see if there are more efficient ways to help our students. And my guess is that it's not necessary to do this very much with students who are typical readers and who map words very easily and are on grade level. But for our struggling students, I have found it helpful, and I have found that it brings success to these students. But if you're doing it another way, I'd love to find out how other people are doing it. Maybe we can work towards developing something to help more students become successful. If you're interested in any of the material I use, most of it should be up on my TPT store. Come and see this uh, QR code and come and see what I have there and see if maybe it would help in your classroom. Okay, thank you.